David Chen woke up in a hospital bed 3 days after the accident. His trumpet was destroyed. His leg was broken in 4 places. The doctors said he'd been brought in by a man who refused to give his name. David's mother was crying when she saw the hospital bill, $47,000 for surgery and care. They didn't have that kind of money, but the nurse smiled and said, "It's already been paid. All of it. The man who brought you in took care of everything." Who was he? David spent the next 30 years trying to find out. It was June 15th, 1968. At 2:30 in the morning, David Chen, a 23-year-old trumpet player, was driving home from a late-night gig at a small club in the East Village. He'd made $40 that night, enough to cover rent if he was careful. His beat-up Volkswagen Bug was making that concerning rattling sound again, but it was running, and that's all that mattered. David was thinking about the set he'd just played. It wasn't great. He'd missed some changes, rushed through a solo, felt the disconnect between what was in his head and what came out of his horn. He was discouraged. Maybe his father was right. Maybe music was a foolish dream. Maybe he should go back to school, get a real job, stop chasing something that felt further away every day. He never saw the other car run the red light. The impact sent David's VW spinning into a lamppost. The world became a confusion of breaking glass, screeching metal, and then silence. When David tried to move, pain shot through his left leg so intensely that everything went grey. His trumpet case had flown open on impact. His horn, the one his grandfather had given him, the one he'd saved for 2 years to get repaired, lay crushed on the dashboard, bent beyond recognition. David tried to call for help, but couldn't find his voice. The other car, a black Cadillac, had fled the scene. The street was empty. No witnesses, no help coming. Just David, bleeding and trapped in a crumpled car, watching his life drain away onto a Manhattan street. Then headlights appeared. A red Ferrari Daytona slowed down, seemed like it might keep going, then stopped. David couldn't see the driver clearly through his cracked windshield and the pain that was making everything blur. He just saw a silhouette, a man stepping out of the Ferrari, wearing dark clothing and what looked like sunglasses, even though it was the middle of the night. The man walked over to the wreckage, looked at David for a long moment, then looked at the crushed trumpet on the dashboard. He picked up the destroyed horn, examined it, set it down gently. Then he pulled open the driver's door, which took considerable force since it was badly damaged, and spoke for the first time. "Can you move?" David tried to respond, but only managed to groan. His leg was pinned under the dashboard. The man in sunglasses didn't hesitate. He reached in, carefully assessed the situation, then with surprising strength began working to free David's leg. It took several minutes of careful maneuvering, during which David drifted in and out of consciousness. When he finally came free, the man lifted him out of the car and carried him to the Ferrari. "Hospital's 10 minutes away," the man said, his voice rough but not unkind. "You're going to make it." "My trumpet," David managed to whisper. The stranger looked back at the wreckage, at the destroyed instrument visible through the broken windshield. "I'll take care of it," he said. Then he got in the Ferrari and drove faster than any ambulance ever could. David passed out somewhere around 5th Avenue. When he came to briefly, they were pulling into the emergency entrance of Mount Sinai Hospital. The man in sunglasses was already talking to the doctors, pointing at David's leg, explaining the accident. David tried to see his face clearly, but couldn't focus through the pain and shock. "Name?" A nurse was asking the man. "That's not important. Just take care of him. He's a musician." "But sir, we need..." "I said it's not important. Here." David heard the sound of something being placed on a desk. "This should cover initial treatment. I'll handle the rest." Then the man was gone, and David was being wheeled into surgery. David woke up 3 days later. His mother was sitting beside his bed, her eyes red from crying. When she saw him wake up, she grabbed his hand and started sobbing with relief. "Mum," David said, his throat dry. "What happened?" Through tears, she told him multiple fractures in his left leg, internal bleeding that required emergency surgery, a concussion. The doctors said if he'd arrived even 20 minutes later, he probably would have died from blood loss. "Who brought me in?" David asked. His mother shook her head. "Nobody knows. A man in sunglasses. He left before they could get his information." "But David," she paused, fresh tears streaming down her face. "The hospital bill, the surgery, the care, everything. It's $47,000. We don't have that. We don't have anything close to that." David felt his stomach drop. $47,000. That was more money than his family had ever had at one time. His father worked in a restaurant. His mother cleaned houses. That kind of debt would destroy them. "I'll figure it out," David said, though he had no idea how. "I'll work. No, David, you don't understand." His mother was smiling through her tears now. "It's already paid, all of it. The man who brought you in fake, he came back the next day and paid the entire bill. The surgery, the room, the doctors, everything. And he left instructions that all future care should be billed to him." David couldn't process what he was hearing. What? Who would do that? The nurse said he refused to give his name. He just said, "Take care of the trumpet player." Over the next 2 months, as David recovered in the hospital and then in extended care, strange things kept happening. The best orthopedic surgeon in New York suddenly had time to oversee his case. Physical therapy was arranged at a top facility. When David asked about costs, he was told everything was covered by the friend who brought you in. And the nurses mentioned something else. Mine in dark sunglasses who came by every few days, always early in the morning or late at night. He never came into David's room, just stood in the doorway, watched for a moment, spoke quietly to the nurses about David's progress, and left. One nurse described him as distinguished-looking, probably in his 40s, drove a red Ferrari. David tried to stay awake to catch him, but he never succeeded. The man's visits were irregular, and always when David was sleeping or in therapy, it was like he was intentionally avoiding being seen. After 2 months, David was released. His leg would heal, though he'd walk with a slight limp forever. The hospital gave him a package when he left. Inside was a brand new trumpet. Not just any trumpet, but a professional-grade Selmer, worth thousands of dollars. There was a card with it, handwritten in elegant script. "Your old one was destroyed. This one has better tone anyway. Keep playing. The world needs to hear your sound. A friend." David held that card and cried. Someone he'd never met, whose face he'd never clearly seen, had saved his life and given him the means to continue pursuing his dream. Who does that? Who spends $50,000 on a stranger and asks for nothing in return? For the next 30 years, David Chen tried to find out. He asked everyone he could think of. Hospital staff, police officers who'd filed the accident report, other musicians who might know about a generous jazz fan with a red Ferrari. He hired a private investigator once, but it led nowhere. The hospital's records listed the benefactor only as anonymous donor, case #2847. The payments had been made in cash, impossible to trace. David became a successful musician, not famous, but respected. He played with various bands, taught at a music school, made a decent living, and he never forgot the stranger who saved him. That trumpet, the one that came with the mysterious card, became his primary instrument. He played it at every gig, every recording session, every lesson he taught. It was a reminder that somewhere out there was a person who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. The card stayed in his wallet for 30 years. He'd take it out sometimes, read those words, "Keep playing. The world needs to hear your sound," and wonder who had written them. What kind of person had that much faith in a struggling musician? They didn't even know. In 1998, David was invited to perform at a Miles Davis tribute concert in Manhattan. Miles had died 7 years earlier, and the jazz community was celebrating his legacy with performances of his music. David was honored to be included, though he was just one of many musicians playing that night. During rehearsal, David was practicing in a backstage room when an older gentleman walked in. He introduced himself as Charlie Williams, a saxophonist who had played with Miles in the late 60s. "That's a beautiful tone you have," Charlie said, listening to David play. "That's a Selma, isn't it? Professional grade. Those aren't cheap." "A gift," David said. "From someone who saved my life a long time ago." Something in Charlie's expression changed. "Really? Tell me about it." David told the story. The accident in 1968, the stranger in sunglasses, the mysterious payments, the trumpet that appeared when he left the hospital. As he talked, Charlie's eyes widened. 1968, Charlie said. "June, you said? And the man drove a red Ferrari." "Yeah. You know something." Charlie sat down heavily. "David, I think I know who your benefactor was, and if I'm right, you've been playing a tribute to him without even knowing it." "Who?" "Miles Davis." David laughed. "That's impossible. Why would Miles Davis save some random kid he didn't know?" Charlie smiled sadly. "Because that's exactly something Miles would do. Let me tell you what I know." Charlie explained that in 1968, Miles drove a red Ferrari Daytona. He was known for wearing dark sunglasses constantly, even at night. And Miles had a habit of helping young musicians in secret. He didn't want recognition, didn't want gratitude, just wanted to help talent survive. Miles lost a lot of friends to bad luck and worse circumstances, Charlie said. Young guys with talent who died before they could share it with the world. He couldn't save them, but when he saw someone he could save, someone with potential, he did, anonymously. He didn't want people to know because he thought gratitude ruined the purity of the gift. Charlie pulled out his phone and showed David a photo. Miles Davis standing next to a red Ferrari, circa 1968. Dark sunglasses. Distinguished looking. Early 40s. David's hands started shaking. That could have been the man. The build was right. The age was right. Everything fit. After Miles died, Charlie continued, I helped sort through some of his things. We found a box of cards, thank you notes he'd received over the years that he'd never opened. There were also receipts, medical bills paid, instruments purchased, always anonymous. Miles kept records of who he'd helped, but he never told them. One of those receipts was for a Selma trumpet, purchased June 1968, with a note attached. Kid's got good tone, needs a better horn. David couldn't speak. Tears were running down his face. Miles was at that accident scene. He finally managed. Probably on his way home from a recording session. Charlie said, Columbia Records wasn't far from where you crashed. Miles saw you, saw the trumpet, and made a choice. That was Miles when he saw real talent. He protected it, quietly, without making a big deal about it. I never got to thank him, David said, his voice breaking. That's exactly how he wanted it, Charlie replied. Miles didn't help people for gratitude. He did it because he believed music mattered more than ego. He probably watched you recover, made sure you got back to playing, then disappeared because that's what the gift required. If you'd known it was him, you would have felt obligated. This way, you just felt grateful to the universe, and you kept playing. That night, David performed So What at the tribute concert. He played it on the trumpet. Miles had given him 30 years earlier, and for the first time, he truly understood what that card had meant. Keep playing. The world needs to hear your sound. It wasn't just encouragement. It was Miles's whole philosophy. Music wasn't about the individual musician. It was about the sound they brought into the world. Miles had saved David not because David was special, but because the music David could create was needed. The gift wasn't really to David. It was to everyone who would hear him play. After the concert, David was approached by several other musicians who shared similar stories. A bass player whose rent Miles had paid during a rough period. A pianist whose hospital bills mysteriously disappeared after a serious illness. A young saxophonist who'd received an expensive instrument from an anonymous donor. None of them had known it was Miles until after he died. He must have helped dozens of us, one musician said, maybe hundreds over the years, just quietly making sure the music survived. David went home that night and pulled out the card he'd carried for 3 decades. He read it differently now, hearing Miles's raspy voice in his head. Keep playing. The world needs to hear your sound. For 30 years, David had been trying to find the man who saved him so he could say thank you. Now he understood that the thank you Miles wanted wasn't words. It was the music itself. Every note David played, every student he taught, every time he encouraged a struggling musician, that was the thank you Miles had hoped for. The trumpet Miles gave him is still David's primary instrument today. He's 78 now, still playing, still teaching, still passing on the gift that was given to him. And when young musicians ask about the beautiful tone of his horn, he tells them the story. Not because he wants to brag about being helped by Miles Davis, but because he wants them to understand what real generosity looks like, giving without expectation, helping without recognition, investing in music rather than in gratitude. Miles Davis died in 1991 without David ever getting to look him in the eye and say thank you. But in a way, that's the most Miles Davis thing possible, because the point was never about being thanked. The point was about a young musician with a crushed trumpet and a broken dream getting a second chance to share his sound with the world. And 30 years later, when David finally learned who had given him that chance, it changed everything he thought he knew about kindness. Because real kindness isn't about being recognized. It's about making sure the world doesn't lose something beautiful before it has a chance to bloom. If this story of anonymous heroism and the power of giving without expectation moved you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories about the profound acts of generosity that shaped music history. Have you ever been helped by someone you never got to thank? Share your story in the comments and hit that notification bell for more true stories about the humanity behind the artists who changed how we hear the world.